In today's episode of the Morales Group Show, we're going to be talking about how to invest in real estate in Canada. Today, we have Kenneth Yim. He's a real estate broker, a KW franchise owner with over 350 agents. And today, he is going to be answering the question whether or not it actually makes sense to invest in real estate in Canada. We're going to be talking about like different investment vehicles, single family residence. We're going to be talking about multifamily. We're going to be talking about maybe a little fix and flip. We're going to be talking about interest rates. We're going to be talking about the future. We're going to be talking about how the real estate market or the investment landscape has changed over the last 10 years, what type of impact the interest rates have had. And then we're going to be talking about floating mortgages as well, too. Welcome to the show. Ken, how are you?
Good, man. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah.
Excited for this.
I apologize about the voice, but let's jump right into it. Does it make sense for people to invest in real estate in Canada?
Not right now. Podcast over. There we go. It all comes down to rates at the end of the day. It used to make sense. Just right now, it's been tough for everybody, I'm sure, as well too. We don't have the biggest difference for us. We don't have the 30-year mortgages like you do. The most we have is 10 years, but nobody ever picks that. It's usually a 5-year term. So really, essentially, what you guys call ARMs over there, adjustable rate mortgages, it's kind of like what we have because ours renew every 5 years, typically.
Got it. So how is the market, with that said, how has it changed over the last 10 years? Like, meaning, like you said, not right now, but I'm imagining at some point it did make sense. Is that because prices have gone up so much, or is it because rates have gone up so much, or what is it?
It's both. It's both. It's highly unaffordable for people, and the only way to get in is to have generational wealth, really. And it's going to get worse in Canada. And really, there's only a couple of markets that are big cities, right? It's basically Toronto and Vancouver, but there's also Montreal and other smaller cities, Halifax, Calgary, all that kind of stuff, right? But for essentially the core where all the jobs are is in Toronto, where I'm at. It's where I'm based out of. So where you guys have migration out of California, going to Texas and Arizona and et cetera, and Florida and all that, we don't have that because really where are you going to go, right? Toronto, Calgary, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. But all the jobs are down in Toronto. It's like the fourth largest city in North America, if you include Mexico City.
How much by population does it grow every year?
Well, Canada grows by 1 million people per year. So 500 of those are permanent residents. 500 or 5 to 700 are non-permanent residents, right? Like student visas, work permits, and all that kind of stuff. So essentially, we need 1 million people per year to 1.2 million to house them somehow, and we don't have it. We're only building 250 homes per year, 250,000, sorry. And the average housing size is 2.5 people per household, 2.4, 2.5, something like that. So essentially, we're building about 500,000, building enough homes to house about 500,000-ish people, but there's still double that coming in, which is a big problem.
What is a typical price for a property? Like, let's say, like, what's like an average deal? Like, you buy it for how much, and then you can rent it out for how much, basically?
So the cap rate here generally is about 4% in Toronto, a major market like this. If you go to the outer suburbs, like secondary, tertiary markets, you're probably looking at 5 to 6 cap rates. Tertiary markets, you're looking at 7 to 10, depending on how small the town is. But yeah, in the major city, it's about 4%. And the average price point, if you look at all the different types, we have a lot of high rises, right? Much like a little mini Manhattan. So we have a lot of high rises and we have a lot of low rises as well too. The average price point in general is about 1.1 million, maybe just under that.
Got it. And what could something like that rent for, basically?
If it's on a low rise, you could do, there's so many different ways to cut it, right? I mean, if you do a single family, you're maybe $4,000 a month, maybe 4,500, let's call it. This is gross income, right? Not including net. We're talking about taxes and maintenance and all that kind of stuff, right? But if you split it up, you might be able to get $3,000 up top and $2,000 below, or if you do it into 3-4 units. So as of right in Toronto, they're doing now where, much like what you guys have, we're kind of following your footsteps in California, where we're allowed up to 4 units now on every residential zoning lot, plus an ADU as well too. So potentially 5 units if the lot fits in.
So basically, the way to do it would be to, because if I'm buying a $1.1 million property and I'm only collecting $4,000 a month, that's negative cash flow like all
Oh
day
yeah, yeah,
long,
for sure,
basically.
for sure. So
So
a one
like
point one million
you,
dollar house, sorry, Jose, $1.1 million house is going to be like a semi or a townhouse, maybe in the core, right? In the outer suburbs, it would be something bigger. I don't think it would get a detached house until you go to really far out, maybe an hour away from Toronto, if not longer.
so for a single family residence in Toronto, what are they starting at?
You're looking at a detached lot, 35 foot, maybe 40 foot. You're looking at like close to 3 million, 2.5 million. Yeah, it's up there. It's up there. So
And those could rent for approximately like maybe like five, six, seven,
yeah, around there.
eight.
If you cut it up, you might be able to get 10 grand, 12 grand, maybe, depending on how many units you put in there. What has been working is something called the CMHC loans, which is a Canada Housing and Mortgage Company Corporation. It's a federal, it's kind of like our Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac that you guys have over there. It's a federal initiative tried to spur residential housing. And you get some favorable rates if you're in one of their programs over there. So
Got
we're
it.
talking about the Canada Mortgage Bond rates, usually around 3.5 to 4%, and you add 1% to it. So you're looking at rates in 4.5 to 5%, which is pretty favorable in today's market when you get a conventional loan around 7 or 8%, if not higher.
And then the loans, if I understand correctly, the loans are like 5 year or 10 year loans, basically, right? Even
Yeah.
with the
CMHC. You can do so we have longer amortization. So with the CMHC, you can do up to 50-year amortization, which is really powerful. I'm talking about the MLI Select. There's a specific program, and you can get up to 50-year amortizations, but they reset every 5 to 10 years, depending on which term you pick.
Got it. So it amortizes over 50, but it's still due in 5 or 10 years, basically. What's that reapplication process like? Like meaning like if it resets in 5 to 10 years, do you have to provide proof of funds again? Do you
No,
have to provide
no,
bank statements? Nothing
no.
like that?
Unless, yeah, if you stay with the same lender, you don't have to. But if you switch, you try to pull out equity, or you try to, yeah, if you try to switch lenders, then you're gonna have to reapply. But if you have the same lender, if you're making your payments and the values haven't changed much, then they won't call your loan.
What are rates right now in Canada?
Oh, they're ridiculous. So commercial loans, you're looking at around 7, maybe 8, depending on your profile, and depending just for conventional loans. The typical residential rates, you can get 3-year fixed for, so they reset every 3 years. Basically, it resets after 3 years, but you can spread it over a 30-year term amortization. So the typical amortization for a residential loan is anywhere from 25 to 30 years, typical. And we're looking at rates at around 5, hovering around 5, 4.8, 4.9, 4.8, 4.9, maybe 5.1. Variable is 7.2 right now. That's a prime rate. And then you take a discount off that. And I've seen discounts of 0.5%. So you're looking at 6 point whatever, 7.
So the 3 year fix is 4.8 to 4.9, somewhere around
Call it around
5%,
5. Yeah.
but the variable is like around 7,
It's 6.7. Yeah. But I mean, this,
6 points.
so every time the Bank of Canada or your Fed, for example, or Bank of Canada, our central bank, every time they drop the rates, the variable rates drop accordingly, right? But the fixed rates are generally tied to the bond yields.
Got it. So the fixed rates are actually better than ours right now. Like ours are like in the 7% right now. I'm getting a jumbo loan right now, and it's basically 7% right now.
That sucks.
And then on commercial loans, I'd probably say it would be a little bit higher. Yet the only benefit is that you don't have to continue resetting it every like 3 years. That it's fixed for 30 years basically. And obviously, you can exit anytime. So if rates drop, you can refinance with like no prepayment penalties or anything
Really?
like that. Yeah.
Well, okay.
So,
So we do
uh,
have penalties to break it, right? If you're on a fixed rate, and it's basically the difference of the remaining term times the
yeah.
prescribed rate that you would get, right? So it could be pretty hefty penalty. For variable, it's just 3 months interest to break it, but essentially, it's not a bad thing to have to reset, right? Because you kind of, right now, if you're buying a property, you're stuck in a high interest environment, and in 3 years from now, hopefully, rates will come back down. Hopefully, right? So it's not really a bad thing. You just kind of roll with the times.
Yeah. Well, if I had to pick between having to readjust or having a fixed 30 year, I would do the fixed 30
Oh,
year
me
all
too.
day.
Of course.
And then if there's no prepayment penalty, if something drops like after 3 years, then you can refinance anyways because there's no prepayment penalties or anyway.
Oh,
So it
that's
almost
insane.
feel like it gives you more opportunities, but it is what it is. So in other words, if you're like holding property for like long term buy and hold, why would somebody do that? Like when like it sounds like most of the properties are negative cash flow in can't at least for a lot of the investors, unless they bought like 20 years ago or something like that.
Or even less than that, right? So don't forget, rents are increasing rapidly here, which is a very controversial topic, as you see on my Instagram and everything, and YouTube. People just complain all left and right and center for rents, right? Because it's the cost of living is so high, and that's partially due to the fundamentals of it, right? With the growing population and just the ability to keep up with that supply, we don't have the ability. So really, we only have one or two major market centers here in Canada that you can go to, and Toronto being one of them, or the major one. And if all these people are piling into Toronto, and over, I think it's like 50% of them come to Ontario, which is our state, right? And from there, majority come to Toronto. It's just a growing population. So we have vacancy rates in hovering around 1% here, right? So rental rates are being pushed up from, anywhere from 7 to 8, sometimes even 20%, depending on the year or the month.
So it's based on potential future appreciation, basically. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Well, for the typical entry level condo as an investment, some people start there. Yeah, it's gonna be negative cash flow. You're looking at cap rates at 3% or so it's gonna be kind of horrible. But if you're looking at a larger multiplex, then you could be cash flow positive, right? Depending on your financing and how much equity you have in the property as well.
What would it take to be cash flow positive on a like a multiplex, basically?
Rule of thumb, it's hard to say, but and depends on how you increase rents. You can always add density, add new units. A lot of these properties are under market rents, and if you find a way to get the market rents, that'd be great. And anything built after 2018 is not rent controlled, so it's pretty simple, right? So anything built after November 15th, 2018 is not rent controlled. Anything before that is rent controlled. So if you have a new multiplex, you can basically raise the rent to whatever you want any year, right? So that's a way to kind of get the rents up, to make it cash flow positive. In other words,
Got it. So you got to get creative. It's similar to us. Like I was considering buying a fourplex right now. And if I bought the fourplex, I would probably break out even on the fourplex buying it. But the way for me to get it to cash flow, I would have to add two additional dwelling units, ADUs, to the
yep,
property.
yep.
And if I added the two ADUs, I can get it to cash flow, but it was still very marginal from like the amount of time that it would take. I can get it to cash flow a little bit, but it sounds like you got to get creative if you're going to do it. If you're going to do it, you got to get creative or probably go out to other areas where the cap rates are a little bit higher, basically.
Yeah, but then the market, you don't know what the market's like, right? Like any kind of major shift in the demographics could really hurt you. People leaving the town, or it's more common to have all the jobs in the city, right? For a long time, we've had offices that were just down in our central core in Toronto. That's where everyone was, right? And then after COVID, everyone left, so the suburbs blew up. But now they're realizing they have to go back to the office maybe 3 days a week, 4 days a week. So everyone's kind of leaving the suburbs now, right? So it can be an issue, right? It's risky, much
What
like what you guys have.
are the vacancies higher in those suburb areas? Basically,
No, for
they
sure,
are.
yeah, and even the tenant pool is a lot. It's harder to pick from good tenants as well too. That being said, I mean, it's not that it's impossible. I mean, it's just not for everyone, right? Investing in the suburbs or investing in the city is just two different animals, really. And I want to make one more
What
point about the mortgage too, by the way, of the resetting mortgages every 5 years, or every whatever term you pick, 1 to 5 years. You can actually port that mortgage over as well too. So if you have a good rate from 3 years ago, let's just say, you're at 2%, you can actually bring that to another property, at least on the residential side.
got
So
it?
that actually helps a lot. Now, there's something that's a bit concerning to all the Canadians as well too, and the Bank of Canada knows this. It's called a mortgage renewal wall, really, right? Where people that got mortgages from 2020, they're all resetting now, and about 50% of the mortgages out there haven't reset yet. And as that comes with that big payment shock, you're getting rates at 2% going up to 5%. That's going to be a big shock for most homeowners and investors as well too. So you're seeing a lot of activity in the housing market because of that, and there's potential for issues.
Meaning like a influx of supply, basically, like people like recognizing like, hey, my rate's gonna go, like maybe even investors, my rate's gonna go from 2 to 5, like my payment's gonna go from 4 to 5,500. Now I'm losing $1,500 a month when I was
Yeah.
breaking out even. Like, let me try to sell this property, basically.
I mean, it's been pretty resilient for the most part. I haven't seen any fire sales. People try to hold on to as much as possible, and I think it's by design, right? Like they want us to stop. The central banks wants us to stop spending money on other things, so we pay our mortgages, right? And we try to hold on to the property as much as possible, especially if values haven't increased from when they bought it to where it's at now. That being said, there is some good news on the horizon, right? I mean, because of these high interest rates, developers aren't building right now, so it's really pencils down for everybody because the numbers just don't make sense, right? They're not going to get financing for it. No one's buying right now for new construction, or not as many people, significantly less people. So in the future, in 4 or 5 years from now, it takes about 5 to maybe even 8 years to build, right, through the whole planning process and everything. It's pretty a lot of zoning issues here. So in 5 years, there's going to be no supply.
So it basically keeps supply stagnant. And then with the population growth that you guys have every single year in Canada, it basically makes it so one of something has to happen. Either prices go up or rents go up as well too, or both, basically.
Yeah, or people leave, right? But so far, it's been a net migration. So there's been net positive immigration here, just because there's a
Yeah.
lot of parts of the world that's just not so good, right? And Canada is safe politically and whatever, right? Like we're pretty safe here and diverse. It's a great city. It's a great country to live in. It's just there's plus and minuses to everything.
Yeah. What I was going to say to you, do you expect foreclosures to increase as these mortgages begin to reset?
There's been significant change in foreclosures for sure, but if you're looking at the amount of foreclosures that are delinquent, we're looking at 0.25 or something like that, or even less.
Very
Less than one
minimal,
percent. It's
basically.
very minimal for foreclosures. Everybody's delinquent on their other things, maybe credit card bills or things like that, and people are just borrowing from other sources. Maybe and you can also remember that 40% of people out here, at least in Ontario, don't have a mortgage as well too. So there's been a lot of wealth built out over the past couple decades because of the lower interest rate environment, where it's just a lot of money here, right?
Got it. Okay. So there's a good portion of the population that has the payments, or no payments basically whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um, what about the rent control? What does that look like
Oh
out
my
there?
gosh. So I know you guys have
Well,
the
don't
same
worry.
problem
We
as well too.
we have rent control as well too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I was
it's
just
silly.
curious. I didn't know Canada had rent control.
Well, not all of Canada, right? So some provinces or states don't have rent control. Ontario, where Toronto is, does have rent controls. Vancouver does as well too. But in Ontario, the rent control is at 2.5% this year. That's the maximum you can increase it. Again, that's only for properties built before November 15th, 2018. So anything
Uh,
after that, it's not rent controlled at all. You can actually triple it if you wanted to.
got it. And what percentage is it that you could increase it for pre 2018?
Right now, it resets every year, but this year is at 2.5%, which is silly because they say it's
Okay.
tied to the CPI, right?
CPI.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
not. It's not. Like inflation's at what, 3, 4, 8% at one point, and they
Yeah.
when they announced the 2.5, it was at 8%. But for some reason, they said 2.5%, which is fine. I get it from the tenant's perspective. They want some stability in their rental rates. But from an owner's perspective, our increases are significant, right? And if your tax bills increase after a certain amount or a certain calculation, then you can pass that. You can go above the guideline increase, they call it.
What about like if you wanted to move back into your property, or if you wanted to do like major renovations? Is
Yep.
that a reason to be able to get the tenant out?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
So a lot of people have been abusing that, given that the carrying costs have escalated so high. There is penalties for that if you're caught, in bad faith eviction. And there's a lot of news and a lot of political drama between the tenants and landlords, property providers and property renters, I guess you call it, for that same reason, because a lot of landlords or owners are trying to get their tenants out to market rents.
what do those penalties look like? Just out of curiosity.
You can be fined up to $50,000 plus damages as well, from the landlord tenant board. That's for individuals. For corporations, I think it's up to $200,000. I've seen in practice anywhere from $2,500 to like $10,000, $15,000 for
Who
fine.
does the money go to?
Well,
Does it go
damages
back
get
to the
awarded to
tenant?
the tenants. The penalties, I think, goes to the board, the tribunal here. I think I'm not exactly sure. I haven't been caught for
Got
that,
it.
thankfully. So I haven't been. I try to do things with some morals.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's always hard.
Do people flip in Canada as well too? Is that an investment strategy in Canada?
It used to be, and it can be. It's very risky because you're not really providing a lot of value. If you're talking about like a burr strategy, it used to be good when the rates were lower. Now it's just really hard. Now, depending on what you do from the rehab perspective, that are, if you're talking about, taking a 50-foot lot and splitting it to two 25-foot lots, yeah, there's absolutely lots of value created there. If you're talking about adding a story, maybe adding another ADU, there's potential. If you're talking about just a cosmetic flip, yeah, I think that money's gone, unless you're getting this at a steal, the property at a steal, and you just time the market perfectly.
How would you get a property at a steal in Canada? Is that even possible? Like, or is everybody like almost like wanting retail in Canada?
Well, I mean, the market's very efficient here because we do have a centralized MLS system. So,
Mhm.
majority of properties are on the MLS system. So there is price discovery, I guess you could say. But there's situations where sellers are distressed, and there's, you can get them off market, and potentially you find the right person with the right amount of equity in there. They might just let it go at the right amount for you, right? But I think something like 90 or 95% of properties are trading on the MLS. So, off market deals do happen. It just depends on who you find.
You're developing potentially like a senior home facility
Yes.
or an assisted living facility. Why did you decide to go in that route as opposed to maybe buying like another multi-unit property or buying like another single family residence or a townhouse or a condo?
Yeah, well, that property was a assisted living facility to begin with, but it's pretty decrepit. People wanted to move out, and it was empty when we bought it. Right, and the place looked like a haunted house, to be honest. My partner, we have a couple partners there, but the main partner in that building has some more altruistic movements, I guess you could say. He's pretty wealthy to begin with, but he's talking about things just like there's a lot of good in doing it, right? But ultimately, as a business model, it makes a lot of sense because it is like multifamily. It's almost like a hotel to begin with, actually, because you're doing smaller rooms, maybe 300 square foot, and the kitchens are all in common areas. You have a commercial kitchen; it's a larger kitchen, sure, but like you don't have to have a kitchen for every single room. In other words, and the revenue just makes sense from that aspect. And the demand is pretty much unlimited if you think about it. So the existing facility was there. There's a facility across the street, and that's completely fully occupied. So we know there's demand in that area. Yeah.
Got it. Um, what price do you see that as a viable option for people? Do you think that's a good niche for people to get into the assisted living, and why?
Yeah. Now there's heavy regulation, at least in Ontario, for this, right? So
Yeah.
depending on what kind of assisted living facility you have, if it's long-term care, then it's heavy regulation. You need a license for that, and it's really difficult to get that. And there's a lot of major players that are in that space, so you probably wouldn't want to do that. In the assisted facility living, we have 24/7 care, on-site care, and it isn't as regulated, put it that way. So that's easier to get into, and that's what we're doing.
Got it. Where do you see the future of investing in real estate in Canada?
Well, I think if you hold anything long enough, like I said, there's a supply glut because no one's building right now. So the next 4, 5, 6 years out, and the population, we can't. So the reason why we can't decrease population is because we have our pensions, right? Our old age security, they call it. That is a great thing about being in Canada. That needs to be kept up and propped up because they're using the money from today that taxpayers are paying today to fund the people that are actually on the security, right? Old age security.
Mhm.
And without that tax base, that system will crumble. So we need to bring the people in. We have a huge baby boomer population that's just retiring. So we can't stop the immigration. And unfortunately, housing is not tied to the immigration policy. So I think, and I just don't see that changing anytime soon. They try to limit the amount of student permits coming in just for a political thing. just for show, really. But it's not really that much. It's not
Uh,
going to affect much. We still have a million people coming into the country. So I think in the long run, it'll make sense just because people don't have anywhere to go.
what's the what's the like what percentage of the marketplace are owner users that are buying, secondary users, or investors? Like, how is that divided up?
So we don't have really good data here because all the privacy laws. But I heard some newspaper articles saying that there's 20% of properties out there are investor occupied or investor purchased. But I've seen that
Uh,
stat even higher. So at the beginning of a new construction property, say it's a condo, a high rise, um, majority of them are investors because like
Buying it.
yeah, as buyers, right? Because end users don't want to wait the 5 years for a project to be built. I mean, very few of them, like maybe 20% of people. So a majority of them will be investors, and then eventually that gets translated and gets sold on the secondary market to end users. But overall, as a ownership percentage, I hear it's 20%, and no one really knows though.
Got it. But for is that how long developments take? 5 years to
Yeah,
build out
it's
there?
insane. It's for high rise developments. Low rise, you're looking at about
Okay.
18 months to maybe 2 years. Just because the zoning approvals take so long. There's so many different departments that you got to have to deal with. And at least in a major city like Toronto, in a smaller town, it's a lot easier because the town wants development, right? We have some cities in Ontario that's asking for $1 property sales, which is crazy, right? They took that whole Italy
Yeah.
$1 property thing, and they took that whole strategy. There's some rules that go along with it, but for the most part in here, yeah, zoning approvals take too long. You have neighbors that complain and to try to stop development, shadow studies, traffic studies, environmental studies, all that kind of stuff, right?
It is the logic for investors getting in early, like, hey, once it's done, I might be able to resell it 5 years later, and I've only had to put like a deposit. Like, I had a broker who told me a long time ago, he's like, why don't you flip um like new construction? He's like, how? I'm like, how would I do that? He's like, yeah, just go put deposits down on these properties, and if the market's appreciating, by the time they get done with them a year or 2 years later, the market will be higher. And if they're not, then at that point you've only risked a very small amount. And I was like, is that kind of the logic for
I mean
investors?
that's what most people think, but that's terrible logic. You should fire that broker. Don't do that. There's a lot of liability with it, right? Like we can't just walk away from a project. You can't walk away from your deposits here. They will sue you, right? If you can't close
If
on
you
it.
walk away?
Yeah, and who knows what happened in 5 years from now. So pre-construction sales used to make sense back in the day for the same reason you just said, right? You put down your 20% over a scaled period of anywhere from 2 to 5 years, right? Which it's like a layaway plan at the end of the day.
Yeah,
But you,
basically.
you should go in. I always tell my clients anyway, they go in with the fact and the idea of actually closing on the property, and the assignment or flipping the paper is just a backup option. It's the best way to do it. Now,
So
actually, they
so
even tax us a lot because of that.
So what's the incentive? Like, I mean, what's someone thinking when they're thinking about buying a property that's going to be negative cash flow? Like, what's going like? Let's say somebody's doing it today. Like, is there a tax benefit to doing so? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you're still losing money at the end of the day, so I don't think you do it for the tax benefits, right? For negative cash flow properties, I mean, it's very speculative, so that's why condo investing it's better for beginners because it doesn't require as much capital. You'd be in a good location, and there's unlimited demand for rental here, or pretty much unlimited. So it'll be rented out. Just if you go into it, just plan to put more equity down, right? So, maybe about 5 years ago, more like 10 years ago, I would have people say, like, does it cash flow at 20% down? And now very few people ask that. 20% used to be the normal. So now you have to put almost like 40 or 50% down to make it cash flow neutral, even. Right. So it's going to get worse, right? Like it's generational wealth here. And you look at any other major city around the world, like the New Yorks, Paris, San Fran, well, maybe not San Fran, but like London, for example, or Hong Kong, right?
Los Angeles, parts of
Yeah.
Los Angeles.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So that you don't go in there with a 20% down mentality, thinking that you're going to cash flow neutral or positive, even for that matter. You got to come down with like, it's an asset you want to own that will appreciate. It's just you got to put a lot more cash into it and use less financing.
Not only that, but if there's no inventory and some of the inventory is gobbled up by investors, it just makes the inventory less as well too. The only thing is just being able to sustain it if it's negative cash flow during
Yeah.
maybe times where a business isn't performing as well, or your job isn't performing as well too.
Yeah, so for some of those, I talk to people and I try to get them to group up investors together, and you
Uh,
have you and a family member, for example, or somebody you really trust, and you buy it with them, right? Or bank of mom and dad always helps. BOMAD, that always helps having some equity. Well, I mean, essentially, it's true though. Unfortunately, if you're lucky in the right gene pool, right, and your parents bought property, that property is appreciated rapidly, right? So they can always take some of
yeah,
that equity out and they give it to you as a gift, and that's been helping a lot of people buy property that way. Unfortunately, if you're just starting out and you have nothing behind you, then it's quite impossible, really. I mean, like I said, like those major cities I just mentioned, it's the same thing over there, right? As any mature city kind of grows. It's
got it.
unfortunate.
Uh, got it. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, like let's say that somebody's like, "Hey, I want to invest in real estate in Canada," if or any final thoughts as it relates to investing in real estate in Canada, and then if somebody wanted to connect with you, how can they go about doing that?
You will own nothing and be happy. No, I'm joking. If you want to, if you want to get in touch with me, I use Instagram a lot. You can find me on YouTube as well too. Subscribe to my channel. Just look up Kenneth Yim Homes on all platforms, LinkedIn, whatever, Facebook. Actually, I don't use LinkedIn as much, but I'm there. But Instagram's probably the best way to do it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I want to say thank you for taking the time to be on the show. To our viewers out there, we had Kenneth Yim. He talked about how to invest in real estate in Canada. We talked about rates. We talked about like different investments, prices, rents, cash flow, no cash flow. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the subscribe button. If you feel that this would be helpful, make sure to hit the share button. Thank you again, Ken. And to our
Thank you,
viewers,
Jose.
until next time.
You got a great